Okay, good evening, everybody. Hello, welcome to the Center for Brooklyn History. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. My name is Marcia Eli. I am honored tonight to greet you on behalf of the Center and my colleagues at the Brooklyn Public Library and BPL's Arts and Culture team, BPL Presents. Tonight, we're really honored to welcome back to this stage Jelani Cobb in conversation with Salamishah Tillet, who's also returning to our stage, to discuss Jelani's newest book, a collection of essays titled Three or More is a Riot, Notes on How We Got Here 2012 to 2025. In it, Cobb chronicles the rise in our country of critical movements against gun violence, gender inequality, sexual harassment, systemic racism, police brutality, and also the backlash against these movements, a backlash that has helped to fuel the MAGA ascent. Who here hasn't had the experience of reading a Jelani Cobb piece and feeling that his words clarify reality in ways that bring the relief of understanding, but also the fraught feeling of unsettled times? In a very beautiful review, which you may have seen, published in today's New York Times, Michael Jeffries calls Three or More is a Riot a gripping anthology about the exhausting redundancy of American racism. Jeffrey writes, quote, "Given the grim and overwhelming nature of his subject, Cobb is unfailingly modest about his insight and the power of his work to effect change. But that modesty belies the fact that Cobb's writing makes us feel the injustice deeply." Three or More is a Riot is available at the CBH shop, which is in the corner. You probably walked by it as you came in, and Jelani will sign copies at the front at a table and following the program. Following his discussion with Salamishah, we will have some time for questions from the audience. Our ushers will bring the mics to you in your seats. Please help us out by standing to ask your question and keeping them brief. So now let me share just a little bit about each of our distinguished guests and welcome them to the stage. Jelani Cobb is the Dean of Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism. He is a staff writer at The New Yorker and author of several books, including The Substance of Hope, Barack Obama and the Paradox of Progress, and To the Break of Dawn, a freestyle on the hip-hop aesthetic. He received the Peabody Award in 2020 and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Commentary. Salamishah Tillet is the Distinguished Professor of Africana Studies and Creative Writing at Rutgers University, Newark, and a Pulitzer Prize-winning contributing critic at large at the New York Times. She is the author of Sites of Slavery, Citizenship, and Racial Democracy in the Post-Civil Rights Imagination, and In Search of the Color Purple, the Story of an American Masterpiece. She's currently completing the book, All the Rage, Nina Simone and the World She Made. It is so great, and I'm so excited to have you both here. Please help me welcome Jelani Cobb and Salamishah Tillet.
Well, I'm happy to be back, so thank you for the invitation. And your book was published yesterday?
Yeah.
So is this your first public conversation?
It is.
Oh my God, I'm very excited.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I wanted you to experience some of what I was able to experience reading this very big but really powerful book. So I asked Jelani if he'd be willing to read an excerpt for you all, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
So first, I wanted to say thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you to Salamishah. Thank you to the Center for Brooklyn History, and also I see that you have these descriptions of these communities. There's Kensington over there in that corner. Kensington is where I lived when I first came back to New York. I'm a native New Yorker from Queens. When I moved back from living in Washington, D.C., I lived in Kensington when I was a PhD student at Rutgers. So that's my old neighborhood and have a lot of affinity and affection for it. And so I'm glad to be here in Brooklyn. Also, I see my editor, Chris Jackson, over there, and so I want to give him a shout and say thank you to him. Because I'm a New Yorker person, and the New Yorker has this very well-earned reputation for being very grammatically fixated. And I can tell you some stories, really seriously. But I thought I would open with, you have like grammatical notes at the beginning of a book. I have a grammatical note, and it's a little bit cheeky, but it also, I really mean what I say in it. And so the title of it is A Note on Proper Nouns and Proper Negroes. In the summer of 2020, amid the reverberations of George Floyd's brutal death at the hands of a white Minneapolis police officer, a demand was issued for a new grammatical form of reparations. Up to that point, the first letter of the word black was lowercased, including in instances when it referred to people of African descent. The demand in that moment was that the letter B should be uppercase as a gesture of respect toward the putatively black community, that's uppercase B. There was a rough symmetry here. A century earlier, the scholar and sage W.E.B. Du Bois had initiated a campaign to pressure publications to capitalize the first letter of the word Negro, recognizing the lowercase as a metaphor for the broader societal diminution of a race of people. The use of a small letter for the name of 12 million Americans and 200 million human beings, he noted, served as a personal insult. The New York Times, after rejecting Du Bois's entreaty in 1926, acceded in 1930. 90 years later, a number of publications, including The New Yorker, adopted the house style of capitalizing the letter B when it referred to black people. History repeats, etc. Yet the symmetry should not be mistaken for similarity. In Du Bois's time, the work of dismantling the mythology of race had scarcely gotten underway. The pioneering anthropologist Franz Boas had highlighted the contradictions and outright untruths of the idea that humanity could be neatly divided into distinct typologies. But for men of Du Bois's era, people who were literally known as racemen, the battle was not primarily to dispatch the categories of race, but to dispute the idea that those categories were arranged hierarchically. Du Bois sought to grammatically place Negroes on par with Anglo-Saxons, Teutons, and Asiatics, a term that has fallen all the way out of the language, but was nonetheless laureled with an uppercase when it was present. An uppercase when it was when it was present. By the summer of 2020, we knew, or should have known, better. The idea of race as a biological fixture has been thoroughly discredited. To the extent that race remains salient, it is as a marker of particular social histories and the identities forged by that history. The people whom Du Bois successfully helped promote from Negro, lowercase, to Negro, uppercase, had, amid the revolution of consciousness in the 1960s, self-designated as black. The change was a bit of reclamation that retrospectively seems less revolutionary than it must have felt at the time. The polarizing Pan-Africanist Marcus Garvey was an early adopter, coining the phrase "black is beautiful" in the post-World War I era of Harlem radicalism. He meant to destigmatize the word black, which had heretofore been seen as a term of derision among people of African descent. By the late 1960s, an entire Black Power movement had reversed the situation. Black was now an affirming designation, and Negro was the pejorative one. In etymological terms, we had simply shifted from a word with romantic origins, Negro, to a Germanic word, black, that carried an identical meaning. True enough, the term Negro had likely applied, true enough, the term Negro, likely applied by Portuguese-speaking slavers in the 16th century, had been corrupted into a radioactive, anglicized nigger. And since black had no such parallel, the change represented a kind of lateral progress. This brings us to the matter of the case, back to the matter of the case. By 2020, the reference to the community of African-descended people in the United States as black held different implications than the word Negro had 100 years earlier. It reflected the accurate designation of racial categories as improper nouns. The uppercase designation of African American reflected the full equal humanity of this group in relation to their ethnic counterparts. So the well-intentioned, rhetorically satisfying language demands of that tumultuous summer, in fact, represented a step backward. It unwittingly mirrored the demands of resurgent white nationalists for the capitalization of the letter W in reference to white people, demands made because they believed in the categories of race and in the aged, invalid hierarchies attached to them. One must be careful when they find themselves in agreement with their most intractable enemies. It is for this reason that the people who traversed the Middle Passage, suffered the travails of slavery, and became the active agents of American democracy are referenced in this book as black, lowercase, not black, uppercase. Our existence as a community, in this sentence, in order for this to make sense, I'll tell you that the first instance of this word is lowercase, and the second incidence of this word is uppercase, so that the sentence will make sense. Our existence as a community need not be premised on the canards of charlatans seeking to justify murder and slavery. The bonds of shared history and culture will suffice. In short, black people exist, and black people need not. So I'm going to sneak out the side door, go into hiding now.
I know, we talked about
a less than popular opinion.
Yeah, and we talked about in college, I had to really strongly use the black uppercase.
Right, I went to Howard University where you could formally be expelled for using the lowercase b.
Yeah.
Right, like that was like an offense in the honor code.
Yeah, but I wonder if it because I don't want to spend too much time with this, but in a way, this is much of your book is kind of chronicling or reminding us of these moments of symbolic progress that don't necessarily lead to substantive change in other parts of society. So when we were in college, we had like a kind of optimism, and it wasn't tied to a kind of corporate response or institutional response. By doing it, we were actually kind of being rebellious.
Right.
But is it the move, once it becomes co-opted and then made institutional, that's kind of what happens in 2020 with a lot of stuff. So is that part of the caution?
I think those two things were happening at the same time, but they weren't the same thing. So there was the the posting of like the black squares and so on, and there were all the companies that were posting Black Lives Matter, and my joke, not so my not so comical joke was that for a lot of those companies, I would have just been impressed if they had posted Lives Matter. So I was like, black ones, any of them matter. Like I was like, oh wow, that's progress. But I think that the capitalization was when I talked with people who were really serious about it, or even like conversations I got into in listservs or text message groups that I was in, people felt like the uppercase was an overdue form of, I don't want to say reparations, but
you say reparations
repair.
Here though,
Yeah, like repair. And even when I was at Howard, I had a professor, I remember I wrote a paper and I used the lowercase b, and my professor crossed it out and put an uppercase b and said, no one in this classroom is a lowercase anything. And I understood exactly what she was saying and what she meant by that.
Yeah.
But I just think that in 2025, what we wind up doing is inadvertently reinforcing the very thing that we're trying to tear down.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so let's. That was a provocative opening, and it's and there are moves that remind me of Baraka in a lot of ways. So we can talk about that because you do have a really wonderful tribute to him as well. So first of all, the title. And I guess one of the things I would like to say about just even what we just heard from you is that you do this really wonderful job of like giving us a deep historical context that a lot of us don't know. I wasn't aware of Du Bois's own legacy with changing the lowercase to uppercase. And then you relate it to the present, and then you do give us a lot of notes of caution. If we pay attention to the past, then we can see how this is going to play out. And so that's just one example, but I think the book in many ways is us looking back at what you wrote, and if we paid attention to the movements, to the people, to the ideas, maybe we wouldn't be where we are now. So there's this tension, but also like the sweep that you give us. So I thank you for that. But the title's another gesture or another moment of that as well.
So the title comes from when I was in South Carolina and I was covering the trial of Dylann Roof. And there are a whole bunch of things that happened in South Carolina that have all of these resonances that I wasn't anticipating when I went there. Yeah. Not the least of which was that years earlier, in 1947, the New Yorker had run a article about the last public lynching in South Carolina. And there I was in 2017 writing about effectively a lynching in South Carolina. And I was in dialogue with, decades of, New Yorker history in that strange way. But while I was there, I remembered that there had been a slave revolt in 1739 in South Carolina, the Stono Rebellion. And as a result of it, the South Carolina colonial legislature had passed a law that defined a slave revolt as 2 or more Negroes outside the presence of a white man. That if you had 3 black people together, that was considered illegal. That was considered the protocols of a riot were justified then, or protocols of a rebellion were justified then. And then also I learned, and I don't remember where this kind of random knowledge is lodged in your head, but I remembered that a number of different civil codes define riot as public mayhem committed by 3 or more people. And so that was where the phrase 3 or more is a riot. If you have 2 people, you're just acting a fool. But if you draft a 3rd friend, you have a formal, proper riot. And so I felt like that was still what I was grappling with, in some ways, and looking at, the people who were assembled in the church, the people who were assembled, the very fact that South Carolina's history has been defined by it being the only colony that had a majority black population. And so much of understanding South Carolina kind of went into that. So much of understanding the United States has been connected to this matter of demography as we see now with the politics of immigration and voting rights and all these things. If I can take one more footnote with this. If you look at the history of the United States, and I won't walk through all of it now, but if you look at the history of the United States, it is far from coincidental that we would have what's transpired today, these arguments over the very validity of the Voting Rights Act and its ability to protect vulnerable populations and the franchise, at the same time that we have armed militias dragging people, physically dragging people out of the country. Voting and immigration in a country that owes its origins to the foundational idea of we the people, you were setting yourself to have eternal conflict over who we includes. And that is why we have always seen battles over access to the ballot and literal physical access to the country coincide. Happens again and again and again, starting in 1798 with the Alien Act. We could just kind of walk through American history and find those two dynamics surging simultaneously. And that same thing goes back, to like 3 or more as a riot. This is about numbers, it's about demography.
And who has access to public space safely and
literally
without being under surveillance or, as you mentioned, being disappeared, so to speak. I thought it's an interesting kind of metaphor for a collection of essays. I know you pointed out its kind of deep historical significance and what it means for Black people to gather and the ways in which that's policed. But it's also like, this is a collection of many, many essays that you've written from 2012 to 2024. And I wanted to ask you, because Jelani and I share a very particular background and particular training. We're trained as academics first, so historian, like a literary critic. And then we also, though I think are more recently known for writing for public audiences, right? So you can see our training in this, but it's actually a really different voice than the one that we were, that's considered like authority in our fields. And so you write a lot, or you mention in different essays how you came to the essay as a form. And so I thought it would be nice for people to like understand that a bit and how you kind of approach, why the essay? And then when did you realize like maybe that was the genre that articulates your true self or the ideas that you would like to express to the world most frequently?
Well, the first thing that happened was that I failed to make it as a rapper.
Okay. I don't think that comes across in the book, but okay.
No,
but you
honestly.
are from Hollis, Queens, so
yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
No, I am from Hollis, Queens. My older brother used to walk me home from school, as many older brothers do, with his friend Joseph. His friend Joseph became better known as Run from Run DMC.
Yes.
And here's a great story.
Yeah.
Like maybe 12 years ago, I ran into Run in Harlem. And I had not seen him since I was a child.
Yeah.
And he called me by my middle name. He was like, "You're Anthony Cobb." I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "We used to walk you home." And I was like, "You remember that?" That's crazy.
But what was your rap? Did you have a rap name?
I'm not telling you that.
We got the middle name.
I will tell you at the end. It's the nerdiest possible name.
Okay.
And so
We all have names.
but also in 8th grade, I went to IS 238 on Hillside Avenue. Then at that time called the Susan B. Anthony School, and we used to have to line up in height order before we were dismissed from class.
Yeah.
I was the 3rd tallest boy. There was me, then this guy named James, and then this guy named Anthony. Anthony wound up being like 6'8", right? It was gigantic. But James was then and now about 1/4 of an inch taller than me, just a little bit taller than me. So I was always right in front of him. He was insufferable. He was completely self-absorbed and just insufferable. So much so that one day in class, he handed me a piece of paper. Actually, we were online. He handed me a piece of paper with his name on it. And I was like, "What's this?" And he said, "That's my autograph. And you should keep it because I'm going to be real famous one day."
Okay.
And I was like, "Yeah, sure." I crumbled it up and threw it away.
Okay.
That sheet of paper said Cool J because he had not yet started calling himself LL Cool J.
Oh.
And so I thought that I had this glide path into becoming like the next great rapper.
I could see, but it's proximity to the great
Proximity,
rapper.
right?
Yeah,
I was like, I know how to do this. I've seen all these people do it.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen. And then, when I went off to college, I remember my freshman year professor telling us about how essays worked, and that how you should try to cultivate an image in the mind of the reader, and that a sentence is supposed to have a particular rhythm, and that you should vary the rhythm of sentences, and that you wanted to use fresh language and avoid cliches, and I was like writing raps. And it was like, okay, I knew how to do that because I knew how to write raps. And that was like the beginning of me being interested in essays. And then it's like more mature kinds of like, there's obviously like the encounter with James Baldwin, which is indelible. The encounter with John Gideon, which is indelible and has like its kind of mark and its impact. And then reading the whole pantheon. I had another person who people probably wouldn't expect who had a huge influence on me was Pete Hamill.
Yeah, you write about that.
Yeah, whose work I really just adored. I used to think that you could give me, a page full of sentences or a chapter full of sentences, and I could pick out the one that Hamill had written, like in the midst of it, because his sense of rhythm was so beautiful. And so that's kind of how I became interested in the essay as a form.
So, and then Barack is another person that you mentioned as someone you tried to quite literally like imitate the style until it becomes, or shapes your own style as well. So the framing of the book, there's 3 sections. And when I was reading them, one, I was like, oh yeah, I remember when I first read this essay, or I forgot that historical moment. Or you go through this kind of like emotional arc of like, because it starts in 2012. So if it starts in 2008, it's a different, with Obama's election, it's a different sentiment. But you're starting in 2012, which is like, oh, we know we're seeing the seeds of certain things, or they've taken some root, they're not blossomed. And we're also dealing with a kind of sense of disillusionment and the rise of Black Lives Matter movement, right? So if you just want to explain like maybe the arc that you were trying to achieve with these 3 different sections, because in a way it reads like Obama, Black Lives Matter, Trump 1, and then Trump 2.
Right.
But I don't know if that's like, because you're writing in real time, but you're editing this for publication. So I was just curious, what was the journey maybe that you were approaching with the selection of essays and then the framing of the book in the 3 sections?
So we went back and forth, and Chris and I talked about this. We went back and forth about different ways to organize the book. Maybe it was profiles, and then commentaries, and then features, or like, and then he suggested it was like, I think that these things should follow the chronology in which they were written, and then when we kind of laid everything out, it started to look like a 3-act play. Yeah. Because there was that 2012 period where 2012 to 2016 period, where Obama was in office, still the first Black president, amazing, incredible, sure, but you can also see this wave building offshore. Yeah. And you can see that there's this thing that is it's curdling into a particular kind of resentment. And then there's 2016 to 2020, and in that, it's almost like this wave crashing onto the shore. And all the things that came with Trumpism. There's another point about Trump that is really fundamental to understanding him, which I think New Yorkers understand. I think people from Queens really understand. And the reason for that, can you hear me? Okay, good. The reason for that is that Queens is statistically the most diverse county in the United States. And I keep telling people it is not a coincidence that the most xenophobic president in modern American history is a product of the most diverse county in the entire country. There's a relationship between those two things. And his politics were formed as a reaction in the 1960s and 1970s as Queens was rapidly diversifying in the aftermath of the 1965 Immigration Reform Act. And, not coincidentally, both of New York's airports are in Queens. So Queens was literally the first place that immigrants who were flying into the country would land. And so the allergic reaction to the diversification of Queens, the diversification of New York, diversification of America began right there, like locally, and literally in Trump's neighborhood. And so those dynamics were kind of pivotal to what we were seeing happen in 2016 to 2020. And then through the next course, it goes through the Biden years, and the last piece in there talks about the return, the difference between the 2016 election and the 2024 election. And that is kind of, when I talk about notes on how we got here, it's really thinking very much about the pieces that were like harbingers along the way. Trayvon Martin's death, Ferguson, the attack on the Emmanuel AME church, the massacre of people at the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, kind of walking through all of these dynamics that culminated in the thoroughly volatile moment that we exist in right now.
And for those of you who haven't read the book within the last 24 hours, The Parameters of Hope, Winter in America, and History Lessons are the names of the three sections. And you have an essay, I think I'm getting this right, Class Notes, right? Which is about Queens,
Yeah,
you
about
growing
Jamaica High
up,
School,
yeah, and your family. And I think it's one of the most powerful essays because it kind of does a macro, micro move, right? Like you're using that to tell us the story of America, kind of similar to the way that you said, that Trump comes of age in Queens, and so that explains him. There's an essay, I think, that does that from your perspective as a young Black boy growing up, and then takes us out for us to understand America. So I just want to say that it was a really beautiful essay to read, but also I was like, oh, this is what Jelani does so well.
Thank you.
Gives us even small glimpses, and then takes, and pushes the envelope for us to see the wider implications of that. You also have these postscripts, and so not all essays, it's probably maybe 12 or 10 essays that have them. But do you want to explain why you felt like it was important to include them in certain essays, and what it felt like for you to write those postscripts? Because they have a particular tone or urgency, I suppose.
Well, I wrote them because Chris made me.
Okay.
And,
Okay, well, there's that.
but I mean, I think he was right, because these are kind of capsule reassessments. And so this was 2024 Jelani revisiting 2017 Jelani and looking at what I now knew, whether or not this idea held up, whether or not it was completely daft, or, if there was some partial validity that could be preserved and other things that I had gotten wrong. And so it was almost like a scorecard. And then I think there's writing, like all writing is autobiographical. It's either in overtly autobiographical or covertly autobiographical, but you're telling something about yourself. And so looking at those pieces, it was a window into how I understood the world or how I felt at particular moments, and especially the Obama stuff, because I was really confused. I was confused all of the time. I was confused when he declared his candidacy, and I was confused when it seemed to be working, and he was on the verge of becoming the nominee. And I went to Kenya like maybe 2 weeks before he got the Democratic nomination, and they were even more confused than I was. And so, the most confused people were the Russians. I did a fellowship in Moscow in 2010, and this was in the Medvedev era. And these people kept coming up to me and asking one question. Like they would wait until they got to know you a little bit, and then they'd kind of sidle up and conspiratorially whisper that guy is not really in charge, right? And at first I was offended because I was like, yes, he is the president. He, calls the shots. He does, what presidents do and so on. And then after a while, it's like, the questions that people ask may not have anything to do with you. It has everything to do with them. Because I was like, oh, wait, this is Medvedev. They have a president who's not really in charge. So he was like, yeah, we have one. You probably have one too. And we're like, no, it's not exactly the same, But Obama represented such a contradiction that people who, for the reasons of the Cold War, the Soviet Union had taught every bad thing that America had ever done, especially around race.
Yeah.
And the legacy of that is that even now, if you talk to the average Russian student, they will know more African American history than the average American student, period. Like when I taught there, they jump into like, let's talk about this, let's talk about that. They're like, yes, I read about this and so on. They know all these things, right? They knew everything up until Martin Luther King being assassinated and nothing after that. And so, because there was no use, there was no propaganda value in it.
Yeah.
So if the last thing you know is Memphis in 1968, and then all of a sudden there's a skinny dude who's like putting his hand on a Bible, you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Like, what's happening?
Yeah.
And so that's how I think, anyway, I said to say that like going back and writing those capsules was an attempt to kind of sort through what I had been thinking in the moment.
Well, I appreciate the chronological nature of the book because there are ways in which it feels like the profile, the appraisal, we call them appraisals, the New York Times. I don't know if you think of them as like elegies. They kind of feel like elegies. Interrupt or punctuate the kind of political, reflections that you're doing. So you have like Ruby Dee or Sherilyn, not Sherilyn, Gwen Ifill passes away. Yeah. I said Sherilyn last week. So Ruby Dee, I'm trying to think of Baraka, David Carr. You have all these different sections. And so there's a way also that I feel like the historian in you is also acutely aware of remembering things in the present so we don't forget them in the future. And so the profile works that way, the kind of elegies work that way. And I was curious for you, are there different like ways of writing those things, or are they all kind of like the same arsenal, the same imagination, creativity, or do you approach those genres differently? And then how did you feel going back editing and reading because there's a sense of sadness. I'm like, oh yeah, that person passes away. Oh yeah, that person. And then you have another essay about something else, and you're like, oh yeah, and these people are passing away as all this stuff is happening, and we're losing them in a way. So I don't know. And then there's also obviously Trayvon. Right. That's like the kind of impetus. So there's the elders and then the young people.
I realize that there is a lot of death in the book.
Yeah.
And some of it is just assessments of people, and I have always liked the obituary as a form, as a genre. Long story short, I was once in consideration for working at the New York Times. I wound up staying at the New Yorker, but when you come in, you kind of do a tour. Like they were like, "What section do you want to go to?" And you can go anywhere in the building. I was like, "Can I go to the obituary section?" And they were like, "What?" I was like, "No, seriously, I want to go to the obituary section." I really have always appreciated the obituary as a form, and that goes back. One thing that I learned about it was that there was when I was in my 20s, there was a very prominent person who had been ill but was still very much alive, and an editor reached out to me and said, we would like you to write an obituary for this person. And I was like, no, that's so disrespectful. I'm writing his obituary while he's still alive.
Oh yeah, that's what happens.
Yeah. But this is an argument that I lost, and I'm glad I lost it. And he said in response, he was like, okay, were you to die, would you want someone to crash your obit on deadline? Or would you want someone to take 2 weeks to read everything you had written and to talk to people who knew you and to do a nuanced consideration of what you stood for and what you believed in? And I was like, okay, I'll get to work on the obit. And I was like 25, 26. Here's the comical part of it. That person is still alive.
So it's unuseful.
That obit is dead.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know if I have that file anymore. But they just were like, no, I just had a little cough, got over it. I'm still kind of like going. And I'm in my mid-50s now. So in any case, I think that, those forms, and then I have had people who I really admired in different kinds of ways. Baraka, who could write so many different kinds of forms, but he also wrote these amazing eulogies and obituaries. Hamill I really liked because of his profiles, in addition to other things, but he really would get a granular sense of who people were and like what they meant to their times.
Yeah.
Like he could just do that, I think, better than almost anyone I read. And then there's the kind of Jeremiad, that Baldwin, excelled at. And so I have like tried to cultivate some ability in all of those different forms.
Yeah, I find for me that it's different energies that I'm tapping into to create those. So the profile on Reverend Barber is another example of it's a long form essay, but you're really giving us such insight into the multidimensionality of the person. So back to this idea of like the history that's happening and the history that you're incorporating, and maybe even the history that is going to be seen as history in the future. I mean, you're playing a lot around with like different time signatures or temporalities here. So I don't know, like I was wondering, because I was like, oh, thank God you wrote this, because I already forgot this happened, right? And so approaching this book where we are now, and that's kind of part of the playing, paraphrasing your title a bit, subtitle there, like, how do you see your role as a historian, right? Because you're like actively making history by reminding us of being there at, in Ferguson. I mean, there's so many moments that you're part of, and then you're summoning the past to tell us the story of the present. So I'm just curious, how do you see your role as a historian within this tradition?
When we were in Ferguson, and I say we because there were a whole bunch of us who were emerging voices in journalism who were in Ferguson together. And so, Aaron Haynes was there, Adam Serwer was there, a bunch. We kind of go through a whole list of writers that people know. And, we had the sense that all of the themes that we had studied or read about or kind of learned in school were present, or what I was in the habit of saying, because at that point I was a history professor. I'm now a journalism dean, but I was a history professor at that point, and I kept saying that I felt like my syllabus had jumped off the page and had become a headline, and so I don't really see that much of a contradiction, because the history is animate. When we were in Ferguson, and there was, all this conflict, just as a refresher, this was in, around the death of Michael Brown, 18-year-old African-American who had been shot by a police officer and shot and killed by a police officer in this suburb of St. Louis. And his body had been left on the street for, I believe it was like 4 hours in August in this kind of baking heat, and kind of traumatizing the community in this way, and all of these things that came out of it. And there was a push for an indictment of the police officer, which did not happen. The grand jury declined to indict. And then there's this kind of uprising that happens in response to it. And it's kind of like chronicling all of the things that happened. I was talking to someone who pointed out to me that Dred Scott was buried like 2 miles away from where we were standing. And, 1857, the Dred Scott case is literally about the capacity of Black people to be citizens of the United States. And I was like, yeah, no, we're not imposing history on this. We're simply acknowledging the relationship that history has to what's going on around us. And so at varying points, and I would tell my students, at varying points in my life, I've been a historian who sometimes did journalism and a journalist who sometimes did history. And I'm comfortable with the interplay of those two things.
My last question, I'm going to turn it over to the audience. So I think you said there were about 80 essays that you had.
Probably, roughly.
Okay,
yeah.
So what didn't make it in? It's like, what's on the cutting room floor here?
So there was a longer list, and then we were like sprawling like over 500 pages.
Yeah.
And so we were like, no, we have to get under 500 pages. And so we came in at 496.
You did.
And so...
You did come in at 496.
Yeah, 496. And so it's like a boxer trying to make weight. And so, but also we're trying to get to, there's some things that I liked, but that just didn't fit. And, other things that I was like, okay, that's for the next collection, and ultimately, I thought because a lot of the subject matter was heavy, that sometimes it was good to have like a diversionary piece.
Yeah, he's a piece on Queen and Slim.
Yeah.
Django Unchained.
Yeah, Django Unchained, which was like one of my favorite things because I really hated that movie.
Yeah, I did too.
I hated that movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I have seldom despised a piece of art more than I despise Django Unchained.
Yeah.
And then, I wrote this thing and it like detonated. And I was like, I guess people read this New Yorker thing. Like, and it kind of detonated. And then I saw Quentin Tarantino in an interview grousing about it. And I was like, it was just like, yeah, exactly. And I'll say it to your face. But I wanted to have like these other pieces in there that were kind of reflections of different things, so that it was like a little bit. It wasn't just a kind of litany of all the terrible things that have happened since 2012.
Yeah, it's also like how the culture is responding to the very conditions that you're describing. It's not outside of it, but we're all kind of in it together. So I appreciated that as a critic as well. Okay, I think we have a microphone somewhere. Or thank you. We have a person with a microphone. So we can open it up. Okay, 2 people with microphones. And we will...
But I'm a professor. I'll call on people.
Yeah, but make sure that there are questions. We want questions.
Questions.
Good evening. Thank you so much. In light of changing perceptions, identity politics, and so forth, do you think that the W in white should now be capitalized?
So, I don't think that you can justify capitalizing the B in black without capitalizing the W in white, because capitalizing the B without capitalizing the W is even worse, because what it does is erase. If you're making the argument that the uppercase B is meant to represent a group identity, and that's why it warrants recognition, the entirety of American history, going back to the Declaration of Independence, is inflected by white people understanding themselves as a group. They weren't a group. They were very specific European identities. And so, had you gone to Italy and said, as a white person, and be like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm an Italian. Or had you gone to the UK or gone to any of these places. But then we decide that we're going to create this catch-all term for people who really have nothing in common, aside from a relative geographic origin. And we mean this very broadly. And out of that, people hammer an identity. And that identity is determinative of how a great deal of this nation's history has flowed subsequently. And so by capitalizing the B and leaving the W as lowercase, what we wind up doing is giving cover to white supremacy. And so I think that we need to lowercase both of them, or as a less palatable alternative, uppercase both of them.
Getting up is harder when you're older. Thank you for a wonderful talk, Dean Cobb. Are you going to be writing on the argument today on the Voting Rights Act?
My editor called me this afternoon. She was like, when are you going to file something on the VRA? And so I'm working on, something. Also, it was very funny because my editor, first she texted me and was like, we should talk, we should talk about the voting rights arguments. And then I walked out of my building, my apartment building, and like literally right in front of me was one of my colleagues from the law school who teaches civil rights law. And I was like, oh, okay, all right. We're supposed to like actually engage around this. And then we were talking about it a little bit earlier. So yes, I will likely write something in the next day or two about kind of where that fits into the overall agenda, which is to undo the civil rights movement in its entirety. And one last thing that I'll say, you remember the thing that I said about voting and immigration going hand in hand as being connected to this project of curating who is in the country and therefore who is in the electorate. One of the things that the Voting Rights Act did is, that most people don't know or most people don't pay attention to, is that it created these language requirements. Like one of the most beautiful things about New York City, one of the things that I love, like for all the kind of frustrations, rats actually chewed their way into my car last week. I swear to God, they did. And they chewed up the headrests, and they chewed up the seats. It's like disgusting. Like my wife was like, trade it in. Like it's done. She was like, I'll never get in that car again. And like, okay, all right, we'll figure it out. Like stuff like that happens. But things like on the other side of it that I absolutely adore about New York is that when you go into that little booth kind of area to vote, and they hand you that ballot is in every language that you can conceive of. Like in and of the ballot itself makes a statement about our view of democracy. If you speak Haitian Creole, bam, we got you. You speak Espanol, got you. Like, what do you speak? You want, what language do you want? You speak Mandarin? Sure, cast your ballot. That's a product of the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act created these triggers that say when a population is above a certain percentage, you have to have voting materials in the language that people are most comfortable using. The attempt to gut the Voting Rights Act implicitly threatens the civic inclusion of a whole array of people, Native Americans, who have been some of the biggest beneficiaries of the Voting Rights Act. It implicitly threatens the civic inclusion of a whole array of people, including, but certainly not limited to, Black people. That's like a preface of what I'm going to be writing about.
Thank you. Minus the rats. You may keep that part.
I mean, I'm serious. Like, can you believe that?
No.
Like, my wife went down to go get in the car, and then she came back upstairs screaming. And she had like our kids with them. She was like, get in the bathtub. Everybody get in the bathtub. And I was like, what happened? And then,
tough story.
then it was that,
Yeah. I think there's a question over here.
Yeah, hello. Sorry, I'm like collecting my thoughts now after I just did it for like in a minute. I think of like Trump's elections as a response to like the threats to affiliation that Obama and Kamala Harris to an extent represent in terms of like this continuity of white men and white power. So I think the violent reaction of Trump being elected, similar to how you make the point of him being born and raised in Queens and him now being such a xenophobe, those things are related. I think him following a Black man and then following the opportunity of a Black woman to reach the office, I don't think that's a coincidence. I'm curious what advice you have for someone under 35 looking to platform difference in a world where difference seems to be anathema, where we're trying to squanch, again, who is a person, who is legible under whiteness, who's legible against whiteness. How would you look to platform, I guess, I don't like the word diversity necessarily because I think it has a lot of baggage, but just difference, like, and like a rhizomatic way, like a glissant rhizomatic way. Yeah.
So there are a couple things. One, to take your point about the dynamic of Trump following Obama, one of the dynamics that political scientists talk about with fascism is that fascism or fascistic movements always, not always, but often thrive in societies that feel as if they have had some sort of humiliation imposed upon them. Hitler obviously took the resentment that Germans felt after World War I. Mussolini took the resentment that Italians felt, especially after the humiliating defeat, their attempt to colonize Ethiopia in 1896, the Battle of Adwa, and invades Ethiopia in 1935 as a preface to all the other things that wind up under kind of fascist Italy. But he does that in order to purge the nation's humiliating sense that they had lost. They had lost militarily to a bunch of Africans, where all of these other European nations had been able to colonize these parts of Africa, and Italy had failed. And they internalized that as a humiliation. And you can go through that. There's even the kind of dynamic of humiliation that has aided and abetted the rise of Vladimir Putin in Russia. For a certain portion of Americans, the election of Barack Obama was this halcyon moment, and it represented the culmination of these dreams and these intergenerational ideals. But we should not, and we cannot, given where we are right now, overlook the fact that for another set of people, they experience this as a profound humiliation. And the kind of fascistic movement that has arisen in the aftermath of that is textbook. They viewed seeing a black man standing behind a podium with the presidential seal of the United States as a personal insult to their status as a white person. And they have attempted to cleanse themselves of that humiliation. And that is an animating element of the politics that we see now. For your question about young people, I think that it's very useful to study history because the people who we admire, I say this time and again, there's hardly anyone who we admire for what they did in times of comfort. Like everyone that we talk about, everyone that we hold up, is because of what they did in times of difficulty. And moreover, the success that we have enjoyed, to the extent that we have enjoyed democracy, it has been the fruits of labor that was done under very adverse circumstances. And so I think that people should not be disheartened by that, and that you need a small group of people before you can build a large group of people, before you can build movements. And even, it might seem like a kind of anodyne thing to say, but I believe that there is a kind of historical momentum toward human decency, even if we lost this round, even if we're on the ropes in this round. I think that there's still the possibility of it.
Any questions?
So recently I learned that, I guess everyone sort of knows that our economies are going into a recession, but I recently learned that there's been headlines saying that the GDP or something has risen since Trump's in second quarter and everything. But then what I found out was that actually it's because of like whatever math equation they were doing, and it's not like actually what it seems like the headlines are saying, and things are actually going worse. But in that sense, like the economy in so many ways is so tied up with politics, especially Trump's politics. And as we enter into a recession, people of color and people that are in minority groups will be affected much more, seriously than those who have cushion. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, like, what's your thoughts on, like, ways that people of colors can do to protect themselves in a time where they are becoming even more vulnerable, especially with Trump's policies and even local government policies that's happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple things. One, when we kind of pull back and we look at movements like the one that we've seen take root in this country, there are a lot of things. They tend to be conspiratorial, like check. They also tend to be corrupt, check. And they also tend to be incompetent. The corruption and the incompetence go hand in hand. And so very often, when people will talk to me about worst case scenarios, I'll say, well, in order to achieve this thing that they say they're going to do, it will require a much higher level of competency than they've demonstrated thus far. Now, the other side of it is, they're the problems that emerge as a product of the incompetency. I'm much more worried about that. It's the thing that they say that they're going to do, not worried about. The things that they may bumble their way into doing, very worried about. And so I think the communities that are vulnerable, for one, this has been the case. Like, we know about how we have navigated some of these times before us. We have to act to the extent that we can on the very local level, on the hyper-local level, on the community assistance level, in the places where we have, even on the level of, are we looking out for our neighbor? Like, the thing that I say, in a democracy, the fundamental civic unit is neighbor. And what can we do in that way? And I don't think that any of this is easy. I don't think that there's a kind of magic solution. And I think that people will suffer, and I think that people will needlessly die. That's what happened in COVID. I think all those things are very sober prognoses. And to the extent that we can make a difference, it is in the smallest quadrants of our life. And I'm sorry I can't give you more than that.
We have time for just applaud. Yeah. Yeah. We have time for just one more question, but before I take it, two quick things. The Brooklyn NAACP is here at a table right over here, and I know they'd love to talk to you. And also, help me out. When we wrap up, please let me escort Jelani to the signing table. I know everyone's going to want to talk to him, and you had him as a teacher or, whatever it happens to be, your neighbor. But it would be great if you could just let him talk to you over there at the table. So, one last question. Come in. Here we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here, both of you. I want to say the voice that I've heard of yours that I know is your voice as an historian. And I want to thank you very much for that voice and for emphasizing the importance of our loving American history, whatever it is we find there, because I think it does inform how we think about ourselves in the present. I'm curious about your thoughts about what is now a very antiquated term, political correctness. I can remember having conversations decades ago with people who complained about it, and I said, okay, just tell me what it is you think. Like, you don't want to have to say certain things, but just tell me what it is you think, which to me in my life was a seed that at least one of the seeds that has led to this explosive need to express oneself, and that has turned into a kind of rage for some people who feel they have not been able to express themselves or to be seen as Americans in a time when maybe they felt oppressed by certain perspectives. Thank you.
He has a really good essay here on Dave Chappelle that I think.
Oh, yeah. Whew, that dude. So, and I should tell you as like a kind of bookend, the title of my first collection of essays that came out in 2007 was The Devil and Dave Chappelle. And it was what I thought to be a fairly nuanced appreciation of him. And then he started doing like other stuff. And I was like, that's still on the books. Like people think this about, like this is the last time I've weighed in about Dave Chappelle. And so then I wrote this other piece where Chappelle had kind of hoisted himself up, on a cross and made himself out to be a victim, for people articulating the fact that they didn't like him attacking trans people verbally. And the thing that kind of got under my skin about it was that he cited himself as a black man in the course of this. So I felt like he was deploying the history of like some really ugly victimization of black people to justify him victimizing other people, at least verbally, or ridiculing other people. And so there's the last line in that piece, which I'm giving away the punchline, but he goes through that comedy special on Netflix, the second to last one he did, saying that he's making all these trans jokes and he's going to be canceled. He's going to be canceled. After this, I'm going to be canceled. And the last line is that he made those jokes secure in the knowledge that the one thing that would not be canceled was the check. And so that's what I think writ large, that we have very often encountered people who see the inability to victimize other people as a form of victimization itself. And you have the right to say what you want, but don't drape this up as virtue. Like just be honest and say that I really want to say indecent things. I want to be uncivil. And like that's the flag that I want to fly. And we know what that is. But at the same time, I fundamentally think that like a lot of the things that we're dealing with now, is a revolt against decency on its most basic level. And so I think that I have tried to respond by being decent, or at least as decent as I can be. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jelani. Congratulations again.